Hi, today we're going to make Seventh-day Adventist style communion bread, and it's Friday afternoon, and we need to have this ready for the ladies to put together at the church this evening. So I'm going to run through very quickly the way that I do this. This is a recipe that's been handed down through our church deaconesses for quite a few years, but I do it just a little bit differently in how I make it, and you'll see how that goes. Let's talk about the ingredients first. Right off the bat, the most important one is what kind of flour you use, and we use whole wheat pastry flour. We find that Bob's Red Mill does a really good job for us, and if you check the expiration date, make sure you get one that's as far out as you can get it, because obviously unless you're making for a lot of people, this is going to last you for a little while. Keep it in the freezer, and before you use it the next time, set it out either overnight or at least several hours before so that it can come back to room temperature. We use canola oil. I know a lot of people are partial to olive oil for the health benefits and all, but the flavor of olive oil tends to take over in this bread. So for the small little use that this is going to be, we go ahead with the cholesterol-free canola oil. So I was reading the bottle there. And that's that. You're going to need parchment paper, enough sheets for as many batches as you're going to make. We make about 400 pieces for our church, and so I've got 4 sheets of parchment paper set out, a dry measuring cup, a liquid measuring cup, a nice rolling pin that you're comfortable using, a fork, and a knife. I always like to use a knife that will leave my fingers up off the counter. That makes it helpful when we're cutting the pieces up, sectioning it. And I use a plastic ruler. I like the plastic ruler because I can throw it in the dishwasher and get it nice and clean for the next time, and then I use this only for communion bread. It's in a special place where I know that it is and will not be used for other applications, just so it's dedicated to cooking. Okay, and a cooling rack. A cooling rack is also very, very helpful to have. The part that makes my communion bread method a little bit different, I think, is that I use the ziploc baggies. And don't hesitate to use either kind, the kind with the pull-apart or the kind with the zipper on the top. I prefer to use the kind that's pull-apart. It just makes it a little easier later on as you see how we're going to do this. Okay, the ingredients, we've got them measured out. It's 2 cups of whole wheat pastry flour, 1/2 cup of oil, and 1/3 cup of water, and then salt. And I use a kosher salt, so we tend to use a little bit more since it's not quite as strong as regular table salt. The recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of table salt, and I go ahead and use a full 2 teaspoons of the kosher salt. You'll have to taste it yourself and see what you think. Give the bread a little taste even before you bake it, and see what you think about that. All right. As the ingredients go in the bag, I'll tell you a little bit about my experience making communion bread. I consider it pretty much a sacred privilege, and so I always start preparing myself. I pray, I ask God to bless my efforts, that the bread will be tasty, nourishing for the congregation, that they'll be thinking about what it represents, and that I'll be worthy in the process of making this, that I won't take the task lightly, that it is a serious thing that I do. And I start by putting the 1/3 cup of water into the Ziploc baggie. And the symbolism for me is really important. I think Jesus told us that He's the water of life. And without that water, all of us would shrivel up and die. And without His spiritual input in our lives, without knowing that He lives for us, there would be nothing worth living for. He is the water of life. And then the oil, in the Bible, we have many instances where oil is represented. In the tabernacle, it's the oil that kept the lamps lit, that made the atmosphere in the temple there. We think of the 10 virgins, 5 who had enough oil and 5 who did not have enough oil. And I think of the oil as Holy Spirit, as Christ's blessing us and helping us to shine for the world. And without that Holy Spirit, we are really nothing much. When my bread is made and after you've had communion and tasted the bread, there's usually a little bit of residue left on your fingers. It's a little of the oily residue. That is half a cup of oil in there, and some people think that's a lot, but it's really not. The residue is really kind of cool because it's a lingering of the Holy Spirit, I think, afterwards. And when you shake hands with others as you leave church, you get to share that with them. Measure out 2 teaspoons of my kosher salt and put it right there in the bag with the liquids. Jesus says that we are to be the salt of the earth. We add flavor to the Christian life. If we are not dull and tasteless, if we are well seasoned, if we smile, if we're happy, our life can be a witness to others in the joy of living the Christian life. So put some flavor in your life, have some flavor in your bread. When we mix this up in the baggie, you want to have an emulsion of all of these, the water, the salt, and the oil. And by shaking it together, you get a pretty good emulsion. Turns out to be kind of a white, milky looking mixture. Okay, see how nice that is with the bag? You don't have a dirty dish. Alright, and then we add the 2 cups of whole wheat flour. The whole wheat flour, pastry flour, it's a common flour, it's not refined. It to me represents the common man, and Jesus was common like we are, in the sense that he was not distinguishable from common man in any other form. The pastry flour has been ground even more finely than regular flour, and again, the symbolism might be that Jesus suffered through more trials in his life. He was tempted more severely by the devil than many of us, than all of us. And you can see that the bag makes a nice place to mix this up. And we're just going to keep kneading it right here in the bag. Make sure you get out the corners. Clean out the corners and get all that flour. Mix it in well. You want to knead it enough that some gluten forms so that it doesn't just crumble to pieces when people try to pick it up. And also making sure that every bit of the flour is incorporated in. You can see I just keep working it. And inside the bag it's just so nice because it's not sticking to the counter. I don't have flour everywhere. Okay, and when it forms together in the bag into a nice little ball, and feels pretty moist, like Play-Doh for you, then you know it's about right. And take all the air out, shape it into a little bit of a log. Seal it shut, and I set it on the counter for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. You can even set it in your refrigerator and let it be a little bit longer. Let the flours hydrate thoroughly and make as many batches now as you need. Like I said, I'll be making 4 for our church this Sabbath. Okay, I have made 4 batches of our communion bread with the whole wheat pastry flour. I've got 1 already rolled out so you can kind of see how that looks. 2 more waiting on the counter. And I have 1 right here to show you what I do with these. Have my oven turned on to 425 degrees. This needs to bake a little bit hotter. So unroll it. I give it a good smash with my hands to make sure that it feels like it's going to stick together nicely and not be too dry. If it's too dry, then I need to add some more water at this point. If it's too wet, if it feels too gooey, then we may even add a little more flour. But this one feels just about right. I'm going to let a little air into this. I'll grab my rolling pin and just start rolling it out. It's really quite simple. This is something that if you have younger children at home, they can help you with. I've had junior deaconesses over to my house, those early teen girls, and talked to them about the symbolism of communion bread and had them help me make batches. And I just think everybody who has a chance to see the process and to just take a minute to think about the ingredients and what they perhaps represent. I know there's probably nothing really biblical about it, but it just helps bring meaning to it. God gave us all kinds of meaning in the sanctuary, And Jesus told parables and anything that will help us feel and understand a little bit more about what we're experiencing, what we're doing. As you can see, I've rolled that right up to the edge. The nice thing about this is that I can feel to see if it's about the same thickness all the way through, and it feels a little thin down here to me, so I'm going to just roll some of it back that direction. If it rolls out the top, that's okay. You just fold it back in there, put it back in, and this feels like a really nice batch. I don't remember if I said before, but sometimes the weather will affect how moist or dry the communion bread is. So you can see there, and I can feel that it's just about right. I want to smooth that into the edge a little bit there, a little bit more. Okay, and this is where we sacrifice the bag, but it's so worth it with cleanup and everything else. Just take your clean knife and insert it right up to the edge. And these Ziploc bags right here sometimes don't want to cut, so that's when I get my scissors out and just go ahead and snip right through. And you might even want to just snip this piece clear off. It might make it easier all the way through. That's why I prefer the other bags, because the knife just zips right through that and you don't have any trouble with it at all. So you don't generally have to cut it off except with this kind of a bag. Make sure you're not getting any plastic pieces in there. Then take your knife, lift up, and go right to the seam and just slice through all the way down. There's my oven ready. And you can either go on the other edge or just across the bottom, either way. This is something you want to do if you're the mom. The knife is a little bit not ready for little kids. So you can see, and at this point I may, push together any parts that don't seem quite right. Okay, our parchment covered cookie sheet. And I take this, I open it up. Leave the parchment right on top of it. I'm trying to get the air bubbles out. You don't want to push so hard that you're making the bread a different shape, because having it in this nice square is really, really handy. With the plastic still under it, you can lift it right up and lay it right down on top of the cookie sheet. Simple as that. Throw the bag away. It's done. Served its purpose. Make sure the edges are nice and square. And if you're real particular, you can measure them. And this is where we use the ruler. My ruler is approximately 1 inch wide, and so I just use it as a guide. And I go ahead and slice clear through on these. When I was taught how to do it, we just scored it. But then the deaconesses were having to break every piece of bread when they were preparing the communion bread trays. So we'll just keep scoring this all the way through. And at the end, the last batch, I always save some of it that I don't score completely through, because as you know, the elders and the pastor at the church do break the bread in the fashion that Jesus broke the bread and gave it to his disciples. So I save some that I don't score all the way through. This is when I can measure up the edges here, make it square and straight. The Bible tells us that Jesus was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. He bore our sorrows, and by his stripes we are healed. So as I'm scoring the bread, well, first of all, as I was rolling it out, I always think of it as Jesus bearing our sorrows. The weight of the world on his shoulders, the weight of the sins of the world were on him. Oops, sometimes they pop out a little bit, that's okay. And as I'm cutting it, these are like when he was whipped. By his stripes, we are healed. And then I use a 4-pronged fork, just one prong for each of his hands, a nail for his feet, and then the sword that pierced him. And I give each one of these a prick all the way through. Try to do them diagonally all the way through. And when you have that done, they go in the oven. You want to watch it. Everybody's oven is just a little bit different as far as temperature and heat. They generally bake for about 8 minutes, and I've had them in as much as 12. Again, depends on the moisture content. Bring them out. When they come out of the oven, the parchment will just slide right off very nicely onto the cooling rack. And then you just let them cool. And we bring them to church in a little container. I have them all ready to go so that the deaconesses can put them on the plates. And I have one little, actually I save about 3 patches just in case it breaks. I have a patch of about 3 by 3 that I haven't scored completely through, and I put it on top of cardboard so that it stays hard and doesn't fall apart. And that's it. Okay, well, I've got the last batch ready to come out of the oven. I've got 2 batches that are already completely cooled and in our little container. This is a container that's been used for probably 20-25 years, if not longer, to transport communion bread back and forth. Some that I've already broken up in pieces, and I do kind of go through them, and if I see some that are maybe a little too dark, ones that were on the edges or some that broke, I'll sort those out. Let's get the last batch out. My glasses fogged all up. Slide that right off onto the cooling rack. It's a little bit dark as we were setting up here to do this, but those edges will come off nice and easily. I've also saved out 3 pieces. We only need 2, but I've saved out 3 pieces just in case one of them breaks prematurely. And I've taken a paper plate, one of those sturdier cardboardy kinds, and I've cut a hard piece of the paper plate to fit just inside of a ziploc bag. And what I do with this then, this is for the elders, and I just try to keep it so that it's not going to break. I'll take one piece, fold this over, take another piece, fold it over, and I'll take the 3rd piece. And I use the spatula just to try to help keep it together, just in case it might decide it wants to break. Fold that all up. I pack it inside between 2 paper towels, just for extra stability. And then I put it inside the Ziploc bag. And you get the idea. This one's not cooperating today. But anyway, in it goes, and hopefully they'll be, the idea is that they're supposed to still be intact so that the pastors can break them up. And zip that shut. The parchment paper makes it really nice when you've got the pieces the way you want them, that they're all perfect for you. Just slide them right into the container. Lay the pastor's portions right on top, and it's ready to transport to church. So hopefully that's made making communion bread a little bit easier for some of you. I know I've heard of student missionaries, young men way off out in the middle of nowhere who have no idea, but they want to have communion with their little congregation. And hopefully this will be useful for that. And some of you who've been making communion for a long time maybe could add to this some other ideas that you have. But we just hope that it's a blessing for your church and that your congregation will enjoy. Thank you.